To watch my exclusive content not featured anywhere on YouTube, log on to my website at imjustheretomakeyoutthink.com/films.
You are now listening to ethnographic researcher Dane Calloway.
I want y'all to check out somebody named Dane Calloway.
Dane Calloway?
Look into Dane Calloway.
I'ma tell the truth and nothing but it, even if it's out of my constructed budget.
On I'm Just Here to Make You Think Radio.
Oh, see you everyone. This video is officially the second installment of my Easter Egg Sunday series. Now, to those of you that might have missed the first one, I named it Easter Egg Sunday because this is where I will be discussing information concerning many of the visual messages that are presented throughout my documentaries that you might have missed. And each of these videos will be released every Sunday exclusively to you all watching and not anywhere else. I found this to be something interesting, and it was always something I wanted to talk about no sooner as I complete the production of a video at any given time. Because in most cases, the visual messages themselves will tell more information, but the viewer will only catch it if they pay closer attention to detail. So now, let's go to this Easter egg clipped from one of my earlier videos called Why You Should Never Classify Yourself as an African American. At about right here, at this point of the video, the viewer's attention is focused on a picture that carries a lot of hidden messages that I'm going to go over here. First, this image was published in Puck magazine on January 25th, 1899. It is entitled School Begins, and the description of this image states, quote, Uncle Sam to his new class in civilization. Now, children, you've got to learn these lessons whether you want to or not. But just take a look at the class ahead of you and remember that in a little while, you will feel as glad to be here as they are. End quote. Looking at this picture for the first time, you can determine that it's based on a classroom setting. 4 children of color are sitting front row closest to Sam, while a group of other children are sitting some ways behind them. You see a child appearing to be cleaning the window on the left side of this picture, and 2 other children off to themselves on the right. You see the other class that Sam was referring to located some ways further inside of the building. It's apparent that this building is a school, but why would Uncle Sam be represented as a teacher or an instructor here in this image? And the answer is simple, really. Uncle Sam is a personification of the US government, hence the letter U in Uncle and the letter S in Sam. And it wasn't the teachers who created the curriculums they forcefully teach our children still. That's strictly government-operated compulsory education, or rather known as indoctrination. So, what was the government teaching these children? The blue book that's laying on the desk that Sam is leaning over is entitled as U.S. First Lessons in Self-Government. Self-government is defined as a government of a country by its own people, especially after having been a colony. Some correlating synonyms are words like independence or sovereignty. But why would the US government be teaching children in America how to become their own government when that could eventually lead to a brand new government created by the children as adults. Would the government be teaching the children how to kick them out? Or would they be teaching the children how to continue colonization? What is also very important to note about this picture is how the children sitting front row do not have books in their hands. The children behind them, however, do have books entitled as different U.S. states or territories: Texas, California, Alaska, Arizona, and New Mexico. So we can determine that the lesson for that day was strictly intended for the children sitting in the front row, in which they are representations of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Philippines. Even the note located just underneath the blue book says, quote, "The new class, Philippines, Hawaii, Cuba, and Puerto Rico," which indicates that these land masses were a part of the few who consented last to being governed as U.S. territories. The blackboard sitting behind the children who have already consented to being governed says, quote, "The consent of the governed is a good thing in theory, but very rare in fact. England has governed her colonies whether they consented or not. By not waiting for their consent, she has greatly advanced the world's civilization. The U.S. must govern its own territories, with or without their consent, until they can govern themselves." Yep, you heard that right. And mind you that this was published in the year 1899, nearly 30-something years after so-called slavery was allegedly abolished. So again, was the government teaching the children how to kick them out? Or were they teaching the children how to continue colonization? Leave your comments down below and tell me what you think. What else do you see in this picture? If you take a look at it, you'll notice that Uncle Sam is pointing directly at the Indian child sitting in the corner off to himself near the exit, in which the Indian child is seen here holding some type of book or record or document of some kind, and the title is appearing to be upside down here. The viewer's attention sits on the idea of the letters A, B, and C being upside down, since people do commonly read from left to right. However, if you flip this image right side up, then you'll notice that the title of this document is called CBA. I'll give you a second to ponder on what CBA stands for. Just let me know when you're ready. You ready? Okay, so have you ever heard of a collective bargaining agreement before? For those of you that might not know, for starters, collective bargaining is the process of negotiating the terms of employment between an employer and a group of promising employees. A collective bargaining agreement is a formally written, legally enforceable contract that could be valid up until any written specified time period between the owner or equivalent decision makers of an organization and its employees represented by an independent trade union. Sounding familiar at all to you yet? Let's take things a step further. Listen closely. According to the 1828 Webster's English Language Dictionary, the noun bargain is defined as, quote, an agreement between parties concerning the sale of property, or a contract by which one party binds himself to transfer the right to some property for a consideration, and the other party binds himself to receive the property and pay the consideration, end quote. It goes on to say that the verb bargain means to make a contract or conclusive agreement, often with for before the thing purchased, as to bargain for a house. A bargained with B for his farm, end quote. So with all of that being said, we can determine that the CBA that's being held by the Indian child represents a binding labor contract, or also known as an indenture of servitude, which is known nowadays as an application for employment or a work for hire agreement. And what was this bargain, you ask? Well, who else was promised lots of things, only once they have completed cultivating America from the ground up, like acres of land, for example, and they never received them? Which should make you wonder, why would the Indian be holding the binding labor contract when indoctrinated American history tells us that the Negroes were the slaves? And he's holding the document upside down, not because the Indian can't read, but because the English language literally took words from his own native tongue that he recognizes, and the lettering is placed differently. I shared more about that here. Just as the Phoenicians were traders that traveled and created colonies, so were the English, Spanish, and the French. So in other words, all of these languages are in fact trade languages, in which each of these trade languages were eventually passed down from generation to generation over time. But in a more historical sense, these trade languages were better known as pigeon languages. A pigeon language is described today as a language with no native speakers, which is used for business, trade, or commerce. It is the reduced form of a language. But if there were no native speakers, then what language is it reduced from? A lingua franca. A lingua franca, from Italian meaning Frankish tongue, is a language systematically used as a common language to bridge the communication of those people that speak different native languages. English is a dramatic bridge language or a trade language with an added mixture of Spanish words, French words, Greek, Arabic, Latin, and it also heavily incorporates words from the many American Indian indigenous languages that were once spoken upon these lands, now known as the Americas. A lingua franca takes many words and their meanings or ideas and reduces them into a simplified version that could be understood by many. Lingua franca literally means Frankish tongue, a language spoken in Germany that eventually evolved into the language now known as Dutch. What is also very important to note here is that pidgin languages and lingua francas claim to have no native speakers, but that is very far from the truth. The process, which is used to simplify a language, also seeks to reduce the origin of the word spoken. But if you simply follow the word trail based on the sound of a word, the origin of that word usually shows up with a different spelling attached or a very closely related meaning that is often stated with "not to be confused with," etc. Or the origin of that word could be closely related in meaning and just misunderstood. For example, the indigenous word water sounds like water, but this word actually means canoe, which is a boat that sits in the water. So pointing at the canoe in the water and saying water could have been mistaken by a foreigner as the liquid that was surrounding the canoe, and yet it is now our English word for water. Many languages are in fact the same language, hidden behind different spelling and reversed grammar, misunderstood but closely related in meanings and spoken with different pronunciations and different dialects. So now, this should make you ask some questions, like, how did we as a people begin to take on the English language as our primary language? And how did the English language become the official but yet non-official language of North America instead of the many indigenous tongues that were spoken before the colonization of this land? Every 10 years, the true stories of our past are erased by way of paper genocide and social engineering. And then it all gets replaced with brand new name changes, pictures, paintings, and even brand new fictional folklore as supporting evidence, giving you the real reason as to why it is called his story. I'm just here to make you think.